Let's talk about carers. I'm very interested to hear your views on Israel and Iran as well. 0345606 and 973. But I've got to talk about this carers trap because, you work most of your week unpaid as a carer, looking after a loved one, saving the state a fortune. I don't think we can overestimate that, but at no small price to your own life. You work a paying job perhaps in your limited spare time, and you rightfully claim your £81.90 carer's allowance. I think it's a measly sum for the hours you put in, and then one day, out of the blue, you're told you owe thousands of pounds back to the state, tens of thousands of pounds in some cases. Why? Well, because you earned more than the £151 a week you're allowed to earn while still claiming the carer's allowance. Exceeding your earnings limit, found by an MP's inquiry to be mostly through honest mistakes by carers involving small sums rather than intentional fraud, well, this has led to carers being forced to repay debts of thousands of pounds, prosecuted for fraud, even having their homes and inheritances seized by the Department for Work and Pensions. And a report by the Work and Pensions Committee 5 years ago accused the DWP of bullying and harassing those who had been overpaid their carers allowance and blaming DWP administrative failures for not spotting the earnings infringements earlier and for imposing rigid rules that, quote, set carers up for a fall. Indeed, something like 30,000 people. So this has been rumbling on for years, OK? But it's still existent despite the warning from MPs, despite ministers promising to fix the overpayments problem through new data matching technology. But people are still having problems, still having assets seized. 30,000 people in the last year were told to repay sums relating to carers' allowance earnings breaches. More than 800 were repaying sums of between 5,000 and 20 grand, and 36 of them were repaying more than £20,000. How can this be? I mean, it's Kafkaesque. It's mind-blowing, the sums involved. Well, I'm hoping Sir Steve Webb, former Lib Dem Pensions Minister, may be able to shine some light on this. He joins me now. Morning, Steve.
Good morning, Matthew.
As I understand it, the over-earning, going past your £151, you're not asked to repay the extra money that you may have earned. You get essentially loaded up with penalties. Is that correct?
That's right. It's a cliff edge. So if you go £1 over, so you earn 152, for example, they don't just knock £1 off your benefit. They say you are completely unentitled for that week. And I think that's incredibly harsh because, as you said, we're talking about people who wouldn't get the benefit in the first place if they weren't spending at least 35 hours a week caring for someone, possibly, day and night. You can't live on £81 a week, so people often are working part-time to fit alongside that. But there is a limit on just how many hours you can do of work because you're a carer. So personally, I don't think we need this limit at all, and particularly not something as brutal as the one we have at the moment.
It's just been going on for years. I have to hold my hand up. I was unaware of this problem until a week or so ago. But it has been going on for 5 years at least.
As you say, the Select Committee report, an all-party report 5 years ago, recommended changes, and the government departments often don't pay a lot of attention to these reports, but people get caught in the crossfire. And I think one of the things that's perhaps changed a bit is that the jobs people do tend to be a bit more up and down than they used to be. Back in the day, you took a job, you knew what the wage was, it was either under or over the limit, and you got on with it. But these days, people's hours can vary. They can be doing flexible jobs to fit around caring, and they're expected, as well as being a full-time carer, to monitor, whether they've gone £1 or £2 above a limit, to report that, presumably report it in the weeks when they do and not when they don't, and constantly being on the phone. You can't get through on the phone, all that sort of stuff. And I think people's minds are elsewhere. And I strongly agree with the committee that, I don't suppose, it's probably somebody out there trying to rig the system, but the vast majority of people, it's genuine and should have been picked up by the system.
I mean, when I look at the money that carers save the rest of us, it's estimated £160 billion a year. That's bigger than the budget of the NHS, I believe. So there is that is an amazing contribution to society. And I'm really interested, Steve, that are you implying that maybe we shouldn't have any earnings restrictions at all on carers that are doing their 35 hours a week? Because, as you said, if you're doing 35 hours a week caring, you're not going to have a lot of time left over for paid work.
Well, exactly. I mean, if you have to have a limit, you could have one a lot higher just to avoid, extreme cases. But to be honest, if £81 is simply a recognition of what you're doing, and that's less than £3 an hour, so it's not even a minimum wage for what you're doing, then to then say, and we need another system to take it off you if you manage to squeeze in some other job as well, seems unnecessary to me at the very least. And I think one of the unfortunate consequences of this is people might think, well, I'm not going to claim this thing. And actually they should, because it is important that they claim the carer's allowance, partly because it protects their state pension when they retire. So if you have a year on carer's allowance, that's treated as a year as if you've been paying national insurance.
I didn't know this. This is essential. That is...
Yeah. So it would be really unfortunate if people stopped claiming because they'd heard about this. It's important to claim. As the rules stand, if you go over the 151, you have to tell them. It's not illegal, you just have to tell them. But the other thing is DWP actually already have this information. They're all connected up these days to HM Revenue and Customs. They already get a feed of what people are earning for universal credit purposes. So really, what DWP have to do is join all this stuff together to stop these big arrears figures mounting up.
Is there I'm short of time, is there a better way of doing this? As you said, the carers allowance equates to less than £3 an hour. Carers are saving the country £160 billion a year. Am I insane in thinking maybe if we paid carers minimum wage, that the issue of them having to work as well would disappear? They would be better at caring, they'll be able to survive, the person they're caring for would have perhaps better treatment because their carer isn't exhausted. Is that affordable for the country, or am I being really naive?
We certainly ought to move in that direction. I mean, what tends to happen is that if you make a change like that, a lot more people will claim, and you might well say, well, rightly so, but the cost of these things does mount. But as you say, if we don't do this kind of thing, then we end up paying somewhere else in the system, and it's worse for everybody involved. So I think a broad look at this, that in a way, one of the things that I and others have said is, well, let's just put a hold on all of this stuff. Let's stop going after people while we work out a better way of doing these things.
Seems eminently sensible to me. So, Steve Webb, thank you. Should point out that we've now got two former DWP secretaries, David Blunkett and Alan Johnson. They've joined Ian Duncan Smith, their Conservative rivals, in calling for an end to the prosecution of carers. But as Steve just set out there, this has been going on for years, and I'm afraid to say it shows no sign of abating. So if you're a carer and you've been caught in the carer's trap, give us a call. 0345 6060 973 is the number. You're listening to Matthew Wright on LBC. I don't mind admitting I am having my eyes opened by the plight of our carers. Lest we forget, around 1 million people look after someone for more than 35 hours a week and claim the carer's allowance. That is around 1 in 6 of the total number of unpaid carers out there. Not all of them do 35 hours a week. And despite ministers promising to fix the overpayments problem through new data matching technology, vast numbers of carers still falling foul of the system, still being forced to repay large sums. And the government is being urged by all sides to abandon what's been described as the cruel and nonsensical fines. The Centre for Social Justice, a centre-right think tank, saying ministers should end the persecution of carers and accept the government was to blame for allowing overpayments to run up such huge sums. Well, the DWP has responded, as spokesperson, saying we're committed to fairness in the welfare system with safeguards in place for managing repayments while protecting the public purse. Claimants have a responsibility to inform DWP of any changes in their circumstances that could impact their award. It is right that we recover taxpayers' money when this has not occurred, which to my mind is literally stone deaf to the problem at hand. That statement doesn't engage with any of the things we've talked about thus far. I'm going to see if we can get more light on this from Tom Pollard now, Head of Social Policy at the New Economics Foundation. Good morning to you, Tom.
Good morning, Matthew.
So the government's saying it's right to recover taxpayers' money, that it's the claimant's responsibility in between doing their 35 hours of free care or for their £81 allowance and holding down a job. It's their job to keep the DWP informed. Is it?
I think it's just symptomatic of a department in DWP that puts all the kind of onus of responsibility on individuals and doesn't seem to take a lot of responsibility itself when things go wrong. And, what we see time and time again is this kind of punitive attitude it has towards people ends up costing much more in the long run than is saved through kind of penny pinching and trying to recover these small amounts of money that people owe. Some of the stories that have broken this week around experiences of carers have shown that people have ended up having really bad mental health, ended up losing their home, ended up out of work and having to claim more in benefits because of the action DWP have taken. And I mean, to be honest, I spent some time on secondment at DWP back in sort of 2016, 17. And it is a deep kind of cultural institutional problem in the department that it treats people with distrust and suspicion and seems to prioritise catching out a small proportion of people who might look to misuse the system at the expense of offering a kind of supportive and compassionate and effective service to the vast majority who don't.
Why do they do it? I mean, does this play to sort of an ideological base? I mean, I only know one person that went down this route and he didn't last as a carer for very long. They found it economically impossible and too stressful. So I don't have much to contribute from personal experience, but it does seem a bizarre way of approaching this situation. I can only assume that there is some political benefit for the Tories in this line.
I think it's a department that has spent a long time under leadership, which has really emphasised the importance of kind of catching out people who are using the system badly, but also a kind of general aspersion on most people on benefits that somehow it's probably down to kind of a lack of effort and kind of moral fibre.
Lifestyle choice or whatever, isn't it?
Exactly,
like homelessness.
And actually, I mean, the reality, you mentioned there that, you know, there are many more carers who don't get carers allowance. What we know is that many people who do a lot of caring don't see themselves as carers in formal terms and need a lot of encouragement and support to get to the point that they're willing to kind of apply for additional support, because they just see it as something they do as a family member or a friend. They don't see it as something they expect kind of compensation for. And in reality, what happens then is that an estimated 44% of people who are on carers allowance are living in poverty. And that's almost certainly true for many people who are caring but not getting carers allowance. And some of that comes down to the kind of stigma and shame around claiming benefits that's been created by this kind of approach and attitude from DWP.
Are you with Sir Steve Webb, the Lib Dem? And he was suggesting, and I don't know the finances well enough, but he was suggesting there's really no point in even having this sort of £151 cut-off, because the amounts that we're talking about are relatively low, the over-earnings are relatively low, but the punishment, the consequences is very high. And I'm looking at the fact that carers overall save this country £160 billion, which is over the budget, the entire budget of the NHS. And I'm sitting there thinking, as a taxpayer, would it make more sense to pay carers, you know, a wage, a minimum wage, rather than less than £3 an hour, remove the need for them to hold down gig economy jobs, which make life very difficult for them, and then we all move on, and the government and voters can rest assured that care is still being done by ordinary people rather than by society, because government for the last 10 years has kicked any attempt to deal with social care down into the long grass and where it remains.
I agreed with a huge amount of what Sir Steve Webb said. I think, you know, if we're confident someone is providing around 35 or more hours of care a week, any extra efforts they go to improve their income, the idea that we then punish that by docking their carers allowance if they go over £150 a week, I mean, that would end up with them having around £230 a week of income in combination of their earnings and their carers allowance. You know, if you were instead employing a paid carer, even at minimum wage, with, you know, additional fees and, you know, whatever else would come with employing someone, you'd be getting a few hours of care a week, tops.
It's a really, really good point. The cost, if we had to pay for the care, I think that's a brilliant argument. Tom Pollard, indebted to you giving up your time this Sunday morning. Tom there from the New Economics Foundation. I've been keeping Lorraine hanging on the line from Staines. She wants to talk about carers, which makes me feel even more guilty. Lorraine, good morning to you.
Oh, good morning.
Good morning. Tell us your story then, Lorraine. What do you know about the carers trap?
I'm caring for someone with stage 4 cancer, and 2 years ago, because I'm also working as well, but I just do bank hours, so I work what I can.
Right.
And what I do is I accumulate holiday pay, and I didn't realise, and it took me over my care allowance.
Gosh.
And they wasn't very good to me. They were very nasty.
Right, so now this is the bit, because what we've established on this is I wouldn't have, I didn't even consider holiday pay, so I can see there's a trap there. Tell me about how you found out about it and what kind of response, how were you treated?
Not very fairly, to be honest. I did phone them up and did try and explain it, but they was just saying, no, it's an overpayment. So they're now stopping it so much a week out of my money.
How much do you owe?
£2,000 it was. But that was over years, not just in 1 year. So they've picked it up, and then now I'm having to pay it back.
I'm so angry, Lorraine.
Yeah, I was a little bit shocked as well.
This isn't how it's supposed to be, because the first thing I wanted to say when you said you're looking after someone with stage 4 cancer is thank you. Thank you for stepping in. I've done it. It's draining, it's horrible, it's crushing, it's depressing. But someone needs to do it, and we as a society are failing in care. We have no care plan. Successive ministers have failed at it. So you're doing us a favour. You're one of the 6 million unpaid carers out there that saved this country £140 billion, I think it was. I said it might be £160 billion. And you're being pursued for £2,000 because you didn't know you'd accrued holiday pay.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, my job is I'm a carer for adults with learning disabilities, but I can only take so many shifts on at the moment to keep under that threshold that we're allowed to earn.
So your paid work is as a carer as well?
Yeah, well, for adults with learning disabilities.
Right, so you can't
support worker.
You can't do that job. Oh, this is madness.
I know, and my company are crying out for staff, and I can't pick up the hours because I will be earning over extra as well as caring for someone. This is just, it reminds me of what Tom Pollard, I guess, was saying earlier from the New Economics Foundation, who'd had some experience of working at the DWP, and he said the culture there was just, they're just not listening. As the statement I read out, that you have done wrong, Lorraine. You didn't tell them about your holiday pay. You have done wrong. Therefore, you must pay £2,000. It doesn't seem very humane to me. Lorraine, thank you. Talking of moving on, let's just a couple of messages just before we reach the end of the hour. Jackie messages, I care for my husband as he had multiple sclerosis. I got carer's allowance. The minute he went into hospital, you don't get the allowance and have to let the DWP know. Also, as soon as I got my pension, no more carer allowance, as they say. You can't have two benefits at the same time, even though I carried on with an extremely hard job. And then Nick messages, Matthew, to get some context, I was a live-in carer who was paid well. My payment per shift was approximately, this is a private carer, not a free carer. I was a living carer who was paid well. My payment per shift was approximately £200. So you can see the government are getting good quality carers through family friends on the cheap.